Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring something really fascinating. How disability is not only represented in music and theater, but how it's kind of pushing the boundaries of artistic expression in ways you might not expect.
Yeah, it's a real shift, from seeing disability as a limitation to recognizing it as a source of, unique perspectives and creative approaches.
Right. And we have all these articles and research here. And what's striking me is just the sheer range of innovation. Did you know there are musicians using technology to basically feel music?
Wow.
Creating incredible compositions without traditional hearing. We'll also be looking at theater companies weaving sign language and other accessibility tools right into the fabric of their performances, making them even more layered and powerful.
It's a move towards true inclusivity, but also a realization that these approaches don't just benefit specific audiences.
Right.
They add richness to the art itself.
Okay, to understand how we got here, let's rewind a bit.
Okay.
Historically, the arts haven't exactly been known for embracing disability, have they?
Unfortunately, no.
Yeah.
For a long time, the prevailing narrative focused on what people with disabilities couldn't do.
Yeah.
Rather than their potential.
Right.
It's interesting, though, how even in those times, certain figures broke through.
Yeah, like Beethoven. Everyone knows he was deaf.
Right.
But I never really thought about how that deafness might have shaped his music. Did it force him to find new ways to express emotion?
Yeah.
New structures that wouldn't have existed otherwise?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And one that musicologists actually debate.
Oh, wow.
Some argue that his later works composed in deafness have a more abstract, internal quality, almost like he's expressing the sounds he's hearing within himself.
Wow, that gives me chills. It makes you wonder, is there something about experiencing the world differently that can lead to truly groundbreaking art?
There's definitely a connection between unique perspectives and creative output. But the key is those perspectives need the opportunity to flourish.
Yeah.
For a long time, figures like Beethoven or Helen Keller, who achieved so much despite being deaf and blind, were seen as exceptional cases.
Right, almost like superhuman feats, instead of proof that with the right support, anyone with a disability could contribute to the arts.
Exactly.
Thankfully, that mindset is changing, and technology is playing a huge role.
Absolutely. Especially in music.
Yeah.
Think about adaptive instruments.
Yeah.
These aren't just modified versions of existing ones.
Right.
They're often pushing the boundaries of what music even is.
Wow.
There are instruments that can be played with eye movements.
Wow.
Breath control. Even brain waves.
Brain waves. Okay, now that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
I was reading about this percussionist, Evelyn Glennie, who's profoundly deaf.
Right.
She performs barefoot on wooden stages to feel the vibrations.
Glennie is a prime example of how technology and a shift in thinking can combine. She's not just adapting to her deafness.
Right.
She's built her entire artistic approach around it.
It makes you realize that maybe our definition of hearing music is too narrow.
Yeah.
What if there are whole other ways to experience it that we haven't even tapped into yet?
And that's what's so exciting about this movement.
Yeah.
It's not just about inclusivity for inclusivity's sake.
Rare.
It's about expanding our understanding of art itself.
Okay, we've got music breaking new ground. What about theater? That seems like a tougher nut to crack.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing articles here about some companies doing amazing things.
Theater's definitely catching up.
Yeah.
Companies like Deaf West Theater are leading the way.
Okay.
Integrating American Sign Language, not as a supplement, but as a core part of the performance.
So it's not just having an interpreter off to the side.
Right.
It's weaving sign language into the choreography, the acting, everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And often they have both deaf and hearing actors on stage simultaneously.
Wow.
Signing and speaking. It creates this incredibly layered experience where you're not just following the plot.
Right.
You're seeing the language itself become part of the art.
I read that Deaf West did a production of Spring Awakening, which is a rock musical, right?
Yes.
How did that even work, combining those two very different forms of expression?
Their Spring Awakening was a huge hit.
Wow.
They used the music's energy to fuel the physicality of the signing, and the actors seamlessly blended singing and signing.
Wow.
Critics raved about how it added a whole new dimension to the story.
Yeah.
Especially its themes of adolescent angst and communication breakdown.
It makes you realize how limiting it is to think there's only one way to perform a play.
Right.
And Deaf West isn't the only company pushing boundaries, right?
Right.
There's this UK-based group called Grey.
Grey is incredible.
Yeah.
They prioritize disabled actors.
Okay.
And their productions are known for being physically daring and visually stunning.
Mm-hmm.
They challenge the audience to think about what bodies are capable of. Not just physically, but expressively.
So it's not just about making theater accessible to people with disabilities. It's about showcasing their talents in a way that redefines what good theater even means.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a big part of this shift is the concept of authentic casting.
Okay. I've heard that term, but refresh my memory. What's authentic about it?
It means casting actors with disabilities in roles that actually call for those lived experiences.
Okay.
So it's not just having a character in a wheelchair.
Right.
It's having an actor who uses a wheelchair playing that character.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's like, why wouldn't you want the person on stage to bring their own understanding of that experience to the role?
Right.
It would add so much depth and nuance.
Exactly. And it goes beyond representation.
Okay.
Some argue that authentic casting can actually lead to more compelling and insightful performances because the actor isn't acting the disability you're being.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. The technology, the changing attitudes, the artistic vision. You know, it's like a whole new world of creative possibility is opening up.
And it's not just about the performers on stage.
Right.
There's also a huge push for accessibility for audiences.
Right. I've seen theaters advertising things like captioning, sign language interpretation, even something called sensory-friendly performances.
Yeah.
What exactly does that involve?
Sensory-friendly performances are designed for people who might be overwhelmed by the usual theatrical experience.
Okay.
Folks with autism, sensory processing disorders, etc.
So it's not just about being able to physically access the theater.
Right.
It's about making the performance itself accessible.
Exactly.
Oh.
They might adjust the lighting and sound, have quieter areas in the lobby, provide fidget toys, that sort of thing.
Okay.
The goal is to make the experience enjoyable for everyone.
That's fantastic. It seems like a lot of progress is being made.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine it's all smooth sailing.
Well,
are there still challenges out there that need to be addressed?
You're right. It's not all sunshine and roses.
Yeah.
One of the biggest hurdles is funding.
Right.
Arts organizations are already strapped for cash.
Yeah.
And making productions fully accessible can get expensive.
That makes sense. Specialized equipment training for staff, maybe even redesigning certain aspects of the theater itself.
Right.
It adds up.
And that's just the logistical side.
Yeah.
There's also the issue of getting work out there.
Yeah.
Even if a production is fantastic, if theaters aren't set up for accessibility or presenters aren't willing to take a chance, it limits the audience.
So it's like a chicken and egg situation.
Yeah.
You need the demand to justify the investment, but you need the investment to create the demand.
Precisely. And this is where advocacy comes in.
Okay.
Organizations like the National Endowment for the Arts are pushing for more funding for inclusive projects.
Okay.
And there are groups specifically focused on training disabled artists and providing resources for accessible productions.
That's encouraging. It feels like there's momentum building, but systemic change takes time.
Right.
Speaking of systems, you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to dig into, the idea that authentic casting not only benefits the actors, but the art form itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When we talk about inclusivity, it's easy to focus on the ethical side, which is important. But what's often overlooked is the artistic payoff.
Yeah.
Think about it. When you have someone on stage who truly understands the character they're portraying, it brings a whole new level of authenticity.
Okay, I'm with you so far, but some people might argue that by limiting certain roles to actors with specific disabilities, you're actually narrowing the field of talent.
Right.
How do you respond to that?
That's a valid concern, and there's definitely a conversation to be had about how far to take the idea of authenticity.
Yeah.
But I think the key is you're not limiting the pool of talent. You're expanding it.
Okay.
You're saying, hey, there are all these incredible actors out there who've been overlooked because of their disability, and they have something unique to offer.
Right. It's like if you only ever cast able-bodied actors, you're missing out on a whole range of human experiences and perspectives.
Exactly. And those perspectives can lead to new interpretations of classic works, new stories being told, new ways of moving on stage, even new design choices.
I was reading about a production of Hamlet by a company that focuses on actors with physical disabilities.
Right.
They reimagined the play's famous duel scene as a power struggle between two men using crutches.
No, that's interesting.
Yeah.
They took a moment that's traditionally about physical prowess and turned it into something more psychological, more about resilience and strategy.
Right. It makes you think about the play in a whole new way.
Yeah.
And it's not just about reinterpretation. It's about creating work that speaks to the lived experiences of people with disabilities.
There's a play I saw recently called The Cost of Living,
Okay.
which won a Pulitzer Prize.
Wow.
It features two characters with disabilities.
Okay.
And the play explores their relationship with their caregivers in this incredibly raw and honest way.
Yeah.
It's not shying away from the challenges, but it's also celebrating their humor, their intelligence, their humanity.
See, that's what I find so exciting about all this.
Yeah.
It's not just about disability representation, it's about good art, period. Art that moves us, challenges us, makes us see the world differently.
And that brings us to the bigger picture.
Okay.
Why does all of this matter? Why should people care about disability inclusion in the arts?
Good question. I mean, on a basic level, it's about fairness, right?
Yeah.
Everyone deserves the chance to experience and create art.
Absolutely. But it goes beyond that.
Okay.
When we create a more inclusive arts landscape, we're not just benefiting people with disabilities, we're benefiting everyone.
How so?
Think about it. When we're exposed to different perspectives, different ways of being in the world,
Yeah.
it expands our own understanding of what's possible.
Right?
It challenges our assumptions and makes us more empathetic,
Yeah.
more open-minded.
I'm starting to see what you mean. It's like if all the stories we hear, all the art we see is from one narrow perspective,
Right.
it creates a limited view of the world.
Exactly. And that limited view leads to stereotypes, to prejudice, to a lack of understanding.
Right.
But when we bring in the voices and experiences of people with disabilities, it breaks down those barriers.
It makes us realize that disability isn't a monolith.
Right.
It's a spectrum of experiences just like anything else.
And those experiences can be incredibly enriching,
Yeah.
both artistically and personally. I think there's this tendency to see disability as something to be overcome,
Right.
as a source of inspiration in a very one-dimensional way.
You know, you're right. I've definitely fallen into that trap myself. Like,
Yeah.
oh, look at that person with a disability achieving great things. How inspiring.
But it's so much more nuanced than that.
Right.
It's not just about overcoming adversity.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the inherent value and dignity of every human being,
Right.
regardless of their abilities.
It's about moving beyond the inspiration porn and actually engaging with the complex realities of living with a disability.
Exactly. And that's where art can play such a powerful role.
Yeah.
It allows us to step into someone else's shoes, to feel their emotions, to see the world through their eyes.
So it's not just about representation on stage. It's about representation in the stories being told, the characters being created, the emotions being expressed.
And that, I think, is what ultimately leads to change. When we see ourselves reflected in art, when we see our stories being told,
Yeah.
it creates a sense of belonging, of validation, of empowerment.
It's like, hey, my experience matters. My voice deserves to be heard.
And when those voices are heard, it challenges the status quo.
Right.
It forces us to confront our own biases and to imagine a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
So we've talked about the why of disability inclusion, but I'm curious, where do we go from here?
Right.
What can we as individuals do to support this movement?
Well, the most obvious thing is to seek out art created by and featuring people with disabilities.
Go see those plays, listen to those musicians, support those organizations.
Right. Put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
But beyond that, are there things we can do in our everyday lives to promote inclusivity?
Absolutely. It starts with awareness.
Okay.
Be mindful of the language you use, the assumptions you make. Educate yourself about different disabilities and the challenges people face.
Okay, so it's about checking our own biases and being open to learning.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to speak up when you see something that's not right.
Yeah.
Challenge those stereotypes. Advocate for accessibility support policies that promote equality.
It's about realizing that creating a more inclusive world isn't someone else's job. It's something we all have a responsibility to do.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
This deep dive has been eye-opening.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see the creativity and resilience that's flourishing in the world of disability arts.
It really is inspiring.
But before we wrap things up completely, there's one question that keeps nagging at me.
Okay.
It's a bit philosophical, but I think it's worth pondering. Hit me with it.
Okay. Here goes. If art has the power to change perceptions, how can we as individuals harness that power to create a more inclusive world, not just in the arts, but in every aspect of our lives? That's a powerful question to consider.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's like taking all the amazing things we've seen in music and theater, the innovation, the empathy, the breaking down of barriers, and saying, okay, how do we apply that to the real world?
Right. It's easy to get inspired by a play or a concert, but then you walk out those doors and it's like, Now what?
I think it starts with recognizing that art isn't separate from life.
Right.
It's a reflection of it.
Yeah.
And if we want to see a more inclusive world, we have to start by creating more inclusive spaces in our own lives.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But what does that look like in practice? What are some concrete things people can do?
Well, for one, let's talk about accessibility.
Okay.
We've seen how theaters are making physical spaces more accessible.
Right.
But what about our workplaces, our schools, our social gatherings?
Yeah.
Are we considering the needs of people with disabilities when we plan events or design spaces?
That's a good point. It's easy to forget about things like wheelchair ramps or clear signage if you don't personally need them.
Exactly. And it goes beyond physical accessibility. What about digital accessibility?
Right.
Are websites designed so people with visual impairments can use them?
Yeah.
Are captions available for videos?
Mm-hmm.
These are all things we can advocate for.
So it's about being aware of the barriers that exist and actively working to remove them, even if they don't directly affect us.
Right. And that requires a shift in mindset.
Okay.
Instead of thinking that's someone else's problem, we need to start thinking, how can I make this more inclusive for everyone?
I like that. It's about taking ownership, not waiting for someone else to do the work.
And sometimes it's as simple as asking.
Yeah.
If you're not sure what someone needs, just ask.
Right.
Hey, is there anything I can do to make this easier for you?
That seems so obvious, but I bet a lot of people are afraid to ask, worried about saying the wrong thing.
I understand that fear.
Yeah.
But trust me, most people would rather have you ask than assume.
Right.
It shows you care and it opens up a dialogue.
Okay, so we talked about accessibility.
Yeah.
What about breaking down those stereotypes and biases we were discussing earlier?
Yeah.
How do we make sure that inclusivity isn't just a box we check, but a real shift in how we view the world?
I think storytelling is key.
Okay.
The arts have shown us how powerful it can be to see ourselves reflected in the stories we consume.
Mm-hmm.
But that storytelling doesn't have to be limited to the stage or the screen.
So what you're saying is we can all be storytellers in our own way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Share stories about people with disabilities.
Right.
Challenge those narratives that focus solely on overcoming adversity.
Yeah.
Talk about their talents, their passions, their contributions to society.
Because inspiration is great, but it's not the whole story.
Right.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the full humanity
Yeah.
of people with disabilities.
Yeah.
Not just their disability. And that recognition starts with how we talk about them, how we portray them, how we interact with them.
So it's about changing the conversation, shifting the focus from what people can't do to what they can do.
And when we do that, when we start to see the world through a more inclusive lens, it opens up all sorts of possibilities.
Possibilities for collaboration, for innovation, for connection.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Inclusivity isn't just the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It's the smart thing to do.
Mm.
It makes our communities richer, our workplaces more creative, our lives more meaningful.
As we've been having this conversation, I've been thinking about all the amazing artists and companies we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
They're not just creating art, they're creating change.
They really are pioneers, showing us what's possible when we embrace difference and celebrate the unique contributions of everyone.
And they're proving that inclusivity isn't a burden, it's a gift.
Absolutely. It's a gift that keeps on giving, enriching not just the lives of people with disabilities, but all of our lives.
Well, this deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about. I feel inspired.
Good.
But more importantly, I feel empowered to make a difference.
That's the best takeaway we could hope for. Remember, change starts with each of us.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey.
Yes.
I hope you've learned something new, challenged some assumptions, and maybe even discovered some incredible artists you'd never heard of before.
And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing for a world where everyone has the opportunity to shine.
Until next time, keep diving deep.